Hello, this is Richard Sachs at the University of Rio Grande and Rio Grande Community College. I hope you'll be joining me later today when I'll be talking with Meghann Fraley, our Director of Financial Aid, about higher ed funding and financial aid. Thanks. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Richard Sachs, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Rio Grande and Rio Grande Community College in beautiful southeastern Ohio. And I'm pleased to welcome today Meghann Fraley, who is our Director of Financial Aid. And Meghann will be talking about some financial aid issues and some of the things we do here. What I'll be doing first is I've pulled some data from the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is our weekly newspaper in higher ed. And I want to talk a little bit about the revenues that come into a college or university and also the expenditures that go out. First of all, I would note that the college attending public has grown dramatically during my own lifetime. When I graduated from high school in 1974, about 50% of students went directly to college. Now it's over 70% of students. If you take that back 100 years, less than 10% of students are going to college. So again, the United States is one of the most college attending countries in the history of humankind. And I believe Mike Thompson will kick up the first of several tables I'd like to look at. But first of all, just like your family budget, you have money coming in and you have money going out. So these are selected revenues. And again, there are lots of different classifications of universities, but for three of the largest classifications are four-year public, four-year privates, and two-year publics. And I'm talking about nonprofit higher education as well. So the first thing I would notice that for a four-year public, that could be a big university like Ohio State or a smaller college like Shawnee State. About 8.8% of their income each year is coming from federal grants and contracts. About the same for four-year privates. Look at how much lower the figure is for two-year publics. That's because community colleges usually do not do the type and amount of research that the four-years do. Therefore, fewer grants come in. If you look at the next category, auxiliary expenses, things like here at Rio Grande, we rent out our dormitories and our buildings during the summer for band camps. That's one example of our auxiliary expenses. Again, for the 4 years, that's a pretty significant input, not as much for the 2 years. Note the state appropriations. For the four-year publics, it's big. For the two-year publics, it's even bigger. For the four-year privates, you would think that would be zero, but it's not, because of course there are state programs that do benefit private college students, but it's still very minimal. Look at the next category of gifts. Notice how four-year privates, 12.5% may not seem to be a whole lot for gifts, but that's still one out of every $8 that private colleges are using, they've raised in gifts. Notice how small that is for four-year publics. It used to be four-year public universities didn't do fundraising. That's changed radically in recent decades. Notice that the two-year publics, how little they raise in gifts. And that again is an issue because people often go from two-year publics to four-year publics, and then they may give money to their four-year school but not to the two-year school. Finally, this last category, and if you remember nothing else from this show, focus on this. Tuition and fees make up only 22% of the income that four-year publics have. About 35% of the private college tuition is raised by that, and only about 17% of the community college tuition. So again, I've been yelled at by parents for over 35 years who have said, my tuition pays your salary. And I generally am polite enough not to say your tuition pays only a small percentage of my salary. We have to have all these other things in order to balance our budget. If we go on to the second sheet, this shows how we spend some of our money. And again, if we were at a huge public university like Ohio State, they have a hospital, and a hospital has incredible costs, but also incredible revenues. So there are things like that that I don't even deal with at a smaller college. But for example, academic support, that's like tutoring and things like that. Notice it's less than 10% at every institution. Notice it is a little higher at the 2 years. That's because generally public community colleges are open enrollment, and many more of the students need that kind of support. Notice instruction. So this is the cost we're actually paying to faculty. And notice again that it is well below, it's a third to a quarter of our outgoing costs. But there's a lot of other things we're spending money on, like physical plant, like internal scholarships and fellowships, like student services. If we go on to the next sheet, and this is going to be specific to private colleges, there's something we call a discount rate. Now, I'm so old, I started in higher education in 1982. In 1982 and in the mid-80s, I was taught your discount rate should be 28 to 35%. That means you should collect 65 to 72%. So if your tuition's $10,000 a year, you have a discount rate of $2,800. You're not collecting that $2,800, you're collecting $7,200. That is simply not the case anymore. As you can see from this next sheet, and this looks over the last 11 years, notice first-time full-time freshmen in 2005-06 had a 38% discount rate. Notice how that's gone up to 49%. So we are literally discounting about half of the private college tuition in the country. Notice too, if you go to the right-hand column, that's not first-time full-time freshmen, that's undergraduates. Why does that percentage rate drop? Because we often pull students in freshman year with higher awards than we give them in subsequent years. Because guess what? They're here. We got to get more new freshmen. Maybe we don't have as much money for the next category. This is something people don't understand. When they hear something like, oh my gosh, URG tuition at junior, senior level is $22,000. Well, if we're only collecting 50% of that, it's really $11,000 if you look at scholarships and other things that are reducing those prices. Finally, and I want to share with the viewing audience some of the considerations we have. How are we spending our money? For example, let's talk about libraries. It used to be 70 to 80% of our costs for libraries was the print materials we bought. The books, the encyclopedias, the journals. Notice how that's changed even since 2010. And even notice that in 2010, we were only spending just under 20% of library costs on books. And that's dropped to 13.7. Look at the online digital journals and databases, how that is now up to 60%. I'm old enough that if I'm looking at a journal article that I might cite in a scholarly paper, I either want to own that journal myself so I can mark it up, or I like to photocopy the 20-page article so I can mark it up and take notes. Online, I know I can do that as well. I can do it with diacritical marks, track changes, and things like that. But again, that's not especially what I like to do. Notice the increase in ebooks. Notice the decrease in print journals. Notice the decrease in print books. This is occurring nationwide. What we are trying to do is address the students that we have to make certain that the research information that they pull is relevant. Now, after giving you that overview, let me bring Meghann in. And do we have the second camera working? Okay. She's much more photogenic than I am, and you should keep the camera on her for the second half. I came here July of 2014, and Meghann, you came soon thereafter, or you were raised to your position. Was it fall of 2014, spring of 2015?
It's interesting. I started as a financial aid advisor in 2008 here at Rio, and then I left for a couple years in 2011. Came back 2014 as assistant director, and then in January of 2015 I became director.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, tell us about financial aid from your perspective. And again, I told the dirty FAFSA joke before we started, and nobody laughed. But let me tell it one more time. A buddy of mine whose classic rock band broke up, and then he reformed a new one. I said, all you guys have paid for your kids going through college. You've all used financial aid. How about dirty FAFSAs? And FAFSA is FAFSA, all capitalized. And I know a lot of you know that means financial aid form for student, financial aid form for student.
Free application for
I'm sorry,
federal
free
student aid.
application form. Yeah, I'm glad I have the financial aid director here. Free
Application for federal student aid.
for federal student aid. Okay. And a dirty FAFSA is when the data's not there. So the term, not just at Rio Grande, but I think across the country, because I heard it in New Mexico, I heard it in Colorado, they go, oh yeah, they got their forms in, but it's a dirty FAFSA. We can't work with it. That means your parents haven't signed off, or you don't have the income information or whatever else. So talk to us about the FAFSA, talk to us about the whole process and what Rio does to try to streamline that process and help students through it.
Well, the free application for federal student aid is the application that you'll complete as a student each year. So you can start filling that out as early as October 1st for the next year. And then you can use that. We use that application in financial aid at all colleges to determine your federal eligibility, also your state eligibility, and then many times it's your school eligibility. So a lot of schools have scholarships. We have scholarships. We have a Red Storm scholarship that students can apply for, which puts them in the running for over 250 private donor scholarships that we have. That comes out usually around Thanksgiving, and the awarding process begins in February for the next year. So students, I usually send out an email letting students know that it is available for you to go online and complete. No essay required. Just fill out a one-page form about yourself, your major, where you're from, your high school information, and that allows us as a scholarship committee to link you up to the best possible donor scholarship. So that's one way to get additional scholarship money through the University of Rio Grande. We also have the GRID scholarship, or the academic scholarships, which is online. It is awarded to the university students, so the students in their junior and senior level who are Ohio residents, and then out-of-state residents, all 4 years. So it is based off your GPA, which is great because a lot of schools like to go off of ACT scores or financial information. You do have to complete a FAFSA to receive that, but you don't have to be a certain income to receive it. It's all based off of your Rio GPA, really. So how well you do the first 2 years in the community college level determines the level of scholarship you receive the last 2 years. So essentially whatever you put into your first 2 years is kind of what you get out the last 2 years as far as scholarship money.
Okay. Now, since family income can change year to year, should the student renew the FAFSA each year?
Yeah, every year you have to renew the FAFSA, and in the last couple of years the FAFSA has changed where you use the information from 2 years ago as far as your tax information. The FAFSA used to be a very complicated, long process for families and students to sit down to complete. I mean, up until about 10-15 years ago, we were still handing out paper FAFSAs, and you would have to mail them in, and then if something was incorrect, then they would have to mail you something back so that you can get that fixed, and it was a long, drawn-out process, and they've really worked hard to simplify it. They're still talking about things they can do to even further simplify it. Now you can log in, you make a username for the student and for the parent, and you log into the FAFSA and you just put basic demographic information in, and it'll tell you right there if something's not really making sense to their system, so you can fix it right there on the spot. And then as far as income, they're using 2 years ago income, so that way everything's processed through the IRS. and you can actually import your tax information over on the FAFSA now with your login. So you don't have to be sorting through all of your income tax forms and trying to figure out which line to look at to type it in. And so they've really made it so it's almost just a 15 or 20-minute process.
Oh, that's great.
They're talking about, in the future, making it a 5-question
Oh, really?
application. They joke and say a postcard application.
Wow.
So you could almost fill it out on a postcard.
It seems like that wouldn't be enough data to give an accurate
We'll see.
rendering.
We'll see.
Yeah.
There's a lot of proposals going through the House and Senate right now with the new administration. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the Senate and the House bills.
Can you talk a little bit about how federal law and donor intent interact? Because I know just from years of reading the Chronicle of Higher Ed, for example, the Daughters of the American Confederacy had a scholarship at University of Richmond, I think it was, where it had to be only people who were descended from Confederate soldiers. And I think that was found to be okay, but there's other times at which, for example, I know we have certain scholarships like Galley County resident single mom or something like that. And even though that cuts out all men or women who don't have kids, that kind of thing is okay still, and it's not considered prejudicial. But other things might be prejudicial because they...
Well, the only thing that really is considered illegal when it comes to donors and scholarship recipients is if they are stipulating that it only goes to their relatives. So if you wanted to make a fund that was specific just to your children, so that you could get the tax benefit off of that, that's the only thing that was really frowned on.
Yeah. And I will tell you from having worked in Michigan and Colorado and New Mexico that Ohio seems to be a pretty good state for young people wanting to go to college because in addition to the federal program, which we call Pell Grants, named after Claiborne Pell, who was the Rhode Island senator who presented the proposal to Congress 40 to 50 years ago. And again, Pell Grants are for people whose families are under the poverty line, and I think Pell Grants are up to $5,700 or $5,800 a year.
They're up to $6,095 a year.
So almost $6,100 a year. Okay, I'm a year or two behind in my data that's in my head. And in Ohio, unlike New Mexico and Colorado, which do not have state programs for similar people, we have OCOG, OCOG, which is Ohio College Opportunity Grant. Did I get that right? I think I did. And OCOG is very similar. It's not as much money as Pell, but again...
It's $3,000 for the year.
Okay.
So... several years ago, about 2005 era, there were different grants at the state level where any Ohio resident could get maybe a $600 grant, and then based on income, the OCOG came in, and it was definitely a bigger award than it is now. The state went through some budgeting issues around 2008, and so when they did scale back the funding for education, they determined that they were going to award these funds solely to private institution students. So that is another incentive for our university students that are Pell eligible. That's one of the requirements, and you will you'll be eligible if you're an Ohio resident who is Pell eligible, and it's up to $3,000 for the year. So that's $1,500 each semester that a student can receive just solely being a Ohio resident at the private university.
Right. Let me ask you a question about financial aid packaging, because again, a student applies, the student is presumably accepted, and then if the student is filled out a FAFSA, at some point they're going to get a financial aid award. How quickly does that happen at Rio usually after the acceptance? And then I want to talk more about that. But what's the process? So a person's been admitted, and then the file goes over to financial aid, and then you're looking at Pell, you're looking at OCOG, you're looking at internal and external scholarships. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? Is it 2 or 3 months?
So you can start filling out the FAFSA October 1st. We start processing financial aid usually the 1st of December for new students first. So if if a student who completes the FAFSA as a new student fills it out in the fall, they can expect to receive their award letter. It takes 3 to 5 business days for us to receive a FAFSA application back at our institution. Once the student is accepted and has a valid FAFSA, you were talking about whether all the information is there or not, but a valid FAFSA, then we can send out an award letter the next Monday is what we do is our schedule.
Really? That quickly? That's great. Well, and it's interesting because especially at competitive colleges, they really seem to know what each other's doing. And my experience from that is my daughter, who's now a medical resident in Cincinnati, when she applied to Kalamazoo College and University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and this was in-state from Michigan, living at my ex-wife's house. She got into Michigan's honors college and she got into Kalamazoo College, which is a very nice but expensive private college where her boyfriend at the time was going. And what I thought was fascinating, the tuition only for University of Michigan in-state, and this was in 2009 when Meghann started, was about $13,000 a year. It was actually $14,200. It's like $14,250. And Michigan was giving her a $500 scholarship, and that was it. And that brought it down to whatever it was, like $13,750. Kalamazoo College was $42,000 a year. She had good enough grades; they made her a presidential scholar, and they told her this award freshman year will be repeated for 3 more years if you even get just a 3.0 average or higher. And guess what that presidential scholarship was? It was $28,000 a year. Not to her, but to her tuition. Do the math. 42 minus 28 is 14. So she could have gone to Kalamazoo College for exactly the same price that my ex-wife and I paid for her to go to Michigan. Don't you think Kalamazoo College knew that? I mean, because U of M is one of their major competitors for good students. So I thought, oh my gosh, it's a $10 difference. It literally was. And I said, Meghann, go to either school. It's the same amount of money. My ex-wife said, go to Michigan or I'm not paying. So she went to Michigan. But I thought that was fascinating. They know. They knew it, right? They knew exactly. They weren't going to do any better than Michigan, but they were going to match them.
Well, so Ohio all states have an association for financial aid administrators, and we're heavily involved in Ohio's. And one thing that we do when we do have meetings and communicate about every month, we do share that information with each other and how we're doing processes. And sometimes you can get their scholarship strategy out of them. Sometimes they're pretty close-lipped. But what we do with OASFA and with the local high schools is we do what's called financial aid nights in the fall. And so we meet with high school senior families and students, and we basically do a presentation with them and let them know how to fill out the FAFSA, what to expect with financial aid. And that's one of the things that we really push through our office is just because school X is giving you $20,000 scholarship and school Y is giving you $5,000 scholarship, you really have to look at the cost. What does that break down to as far as out-of-pocket expense for you? Because even though it might sound great that X is giving you $20,000, they might still cost way more than the other one giving you a smaller scholarship. So we really talk about that because just for the face value, you're like, wow, I'm getting $20,000, but you need to know what the out-of-pocket expense is at the end of the day.
And I know the wealthy schools always brag that they fund 100% of need. But what they see as need is not always what the family sees as need either. So sometimes there's a difference of opinion there. I know one question that always comes up, so let's say a student comes to Rio or another institution. They're paying part of their tuition and fees. Others are being, other parts of the tuition and fees are being scholarshiped or grants. Let's say the student drops out during that term. Can you talk about repayment and how there's a repayment schedule and how far the way into the term, just so people understand those ramifications?
Yeah, so when you are receiving federal financial aid, there are requirements. They do expect you to complete at least 60% of the term that you're attending, and we try to make that date available through the FA and billing timeline and through the registrar's office, when is a good time that you can withdraw and not have to owe money back. So if you start classes and you withdraw the third week, let's say, you will owe a portion of your financial aid back to the Department of Ed. We return that money to them, and then the balance stays with us. So you never want to get into that situation. We always like to talk with students who are feeling like they want to go home, they're homesick, it's maybe not the right fit for them right now, and just really encourage them to try to stick it out at least, more than half of the term, so that they aren't stuck in a situation financially, because when you owe the federal government money back, it is difficult later, right. And it can go on to have negative effects, whether that's tax returns, going to another school, those kind of things. But as far as student loans, even if you don't complete your degree, you are responsible for those. So when you are taking out student loans, just remember, whether you complete that program or you don't, you're still required to pay that money back. And it is a federal loan, so you are technically owing the federal government money back. So it is something to take serious. But they are really good at repayment plans. So you can always call them if you're down on your luck, if you don't have a job, if you've been a dislocated worker, they can work with you and based off income, reduce your payments even. So they are pretty good at working with you. You just have to communicate with them.
Right. And the situations I've seen, even though students complain sometimes, they always seem pretty equitable. Like, you dropped out of the class. We gave you money to take the class.
They do hold you accountable because it is, at the end of the day, taxpayer money, and they have to be good stewards of that.
Well, one thing I always mention, especially to the CCP audiences, the high school audiences for College Credit Plus, is this is adult level stuff, and there's adult level consequences.
It's hard
if you're
as a parent.
Exactly. If you're taking money, or if you're enrolling in a course that's part of your that's part of your college record. So those things are really serious. We're down to our last minute or so, but tell us about Florence Evans, and can people stop in, or do they need to make appointments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can they access you online? How do they contact you?
So we are available Monday. Starting this Monday, we will be there until 6 in the evening. We're there 8 to 5. Are our normal hours, but
and
Monday will be
Monday, August 13th, 2018. In case you're watching this years from now, okay.
And then this coming Thursday, which is freshman move-in, we are also here till 6. Okay. That day, we are here move-in Saturday from 9 to 1.
Are you really? Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm also going
for questions that the parents have. That's great.
I'm also going to be here on Sunday for an employment fair. Okay. So for students who are interested in working, getting jobs.
Is there a cot in Florence Evans for you?
I know.
Okay.
I don't live far.
Okay.
So that'll be from 11 to 1, I believe. And then the next week we are there Monday through Thursday, the first week of class, till 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thanks for coming on, Meghann. Again, Meghann Fraley, Director of Financial Aid. Richard Sachs saying goodbye from Rio Grande, Ohio. Thanks for tuning in.